I'm Sabine Hook and I am Talk Education's Nursery Consultant. I have a background in teaching. I'm a qualified early years and primary school teacher. I've worked in London for the last 7 years, both in state and in independent schools. And around 6 years ago, I became a nursery consultant because I saw there was very much a lack of people advising on the first steps in education, and I really believe that early years and those first experiences at school are crucial to get right. So I've been doing this for the last 6 years and have built up great relationships with local nurseries in London and further afield. Well, in London we've got, and in the UK generally, we've got a huge range of different nursery ethoses available. So the most widely found would be nurseries following the EYFS, which stands for the Early Years Framework, and that's the government framework for early years teaching and learning. And that is probably quite similar to Montessori actually, in that it's very child-centred, it's learned through play, and it's very much kind of trying to use teachers as a way of observing and guiding. Montessori is one step further than that. They have very sort of prescriptive ideas about the resources you use and the way that you teach. It's again very child-centred. We've also got something like Reggio Emilia, which is an offshoot of Montessori, which again is sort of quite similar to Montessori, but is more centred on the community of the classroom. And then you've got Steiner nurseries and Steiner schools, which again share a lot in common with Montessori and EYFS, but have a greater emphasis on the teacher as a leader, storytelling and imagination. So a lot of the nursery ethos are bound by sort of valuing the child and as the child as the initiator of learning, but then differ in the sort of details of how they conduct the nursery day. I think when you're choosing a nursery, the number one most important thing is to find a nursery that you feel comfortable in, that you feel welcomed by, that you feel is approachable. It's a big thing, that first step of letting your child go into a new environment without you. It's often parents' first time of being separated from their children. So it's really important that you feel comfortable, you like the feel, you like the head. It's also important that you do your research, you look at their Ofsted reports. In my experience, I wouldn't really consider a nursery that was not a good or outstanding Ofsted. It's important that you find somewhere that is relatively local, because for children it's a long day, even if they're just doing mornings or afternoons. If they're starting at 2:30, that can feel like a lot already. It's a really pleasant start to the day if you can scoot or bicycle or walk to school and have fresh air, as opposed to sitting in a car for 25 minutes or half an hour. I think it just elongates the day, makes the day harder. So I think to keep it local, to like the atmosphere, to check the Ofsted, to think a little bit possibly about, if you're in the looking at independent schools, maybe thinking if there's a connection between certain nurseries and schools, maybe a nursery attached to a school if you have a certain school in mind, and also thinking carefully about if there's a certain ethos you are particularly attracted to, say Montessori or Steiner or EYFS. I think what makes a good nursery, there are lots of different components. I think a really important one is outside space, which is a premium in London, because you will find a lot of nurseries that are fantastic but have very limited space and have all these inventive ways of bringing in forest school or bringing in time outside in the local park. If you can find a nursery with a good outside space and children have the ability to free flow inside and outside and choose whether they want to do their learning inside or outside, I think that's a really great attraction in a nursery if possible. I think it's also important to look at the staff, of course, like how qualified the staff are, how cohesive they are, how much changeover there is. Nurseries don't strictly have to have fully qualified teachers on their staff. They can run with staff that are QTS qualified or cash qualified. If you find a nursery which have chosen to prioritise a number of QTS qualified teachers, then that is a real asset again. It shows how much they value teaching. And I think it's definitely something to look up. You can often see at the end of the Ofsted how many fully qualified teachers there are on staff at that point. I think a good nursery will always have a warm and supportive atmosphere, an approachable atmosphere where you can come and talk about anything you're worried about. Whenever I'm touring a nursery, I sort of look for how engaged the children are. So if you're entering a classroom and immediately all the children look up from whatever activity they're doing and sort of want to come and talk to you and are very distracted by you, to me that's usually not a great sign, because when you come in they should really be very engaged in whatever activity they've chosen, their self-chosen activity. So whatever they've chosen to be doing, they should be very focused on and shouldn't be sort of immediately looking up to see what else is happening. And I think you can also see the sort of the closeness between staff and children, how they are playing together, how they're observing. I think all these things are really important and make a great nursery. I think the most important skill for a child to acquire during their time at nursery is independence and an ability to separate from parents. So during the time at nursery, I think personal, social and emotional development is probably one of the number one focuses. So you should get a child who's able to say goodbye to parents, is able to join in activities, is able to be independent in the classroom, put their coat away, tidy up, find their water bottle. All these are really essential preschool skills. So I think that's a really important thing that nurseries focus on. Communication skills, really, this is a really important thing that nurseries should be focusing on, especially with children with English as an additional language or multiple languages. Really important to get the communication skills up to the expected level. Nurseries haven't really got to focus on phonics at this early stage, though many nurseries choose to introduce letters. The best thing a nursery can do at this stage is kind of get children adept at hearing sounds and words, so sort of pre-phonic skills, so being able to segment and blend sounds, to be able to hear first sounds and words, not initially reading and writing, but just getting their ears ready to hear sounds and differentiate between sounds, so that when they get to reception they're ready to sort of fire away with all the phonics. I think that also physical development is a primary focus for nurseries, so that would be sort of gross motor skills, so running, jumping, climbing, as well as fine motor, which is really important, sort of getting the fingers strong enough to be able to hold a pencil and a tripod grip and have control. And that would be done in a whole range of different ways, threading beads or Play-Doh or wet messy play. So these are the things that nurseries really should be focusing on. I think settling a child into nursery is one of even if it's your second, third, fourth child, it's always quite an emotional experience. So I think to approach it with positivity as much as you can and to not be too afraid of it, because obviously that's all communicated to the child. I think I did a number of things with my own children, one of which I found was very useful, which was to ask the nursery for a picture of the nursery class teacher and my child's key worker before starting. And I had the picture up on the sort of the fridge for the whole of the summer holidays leading up to starting, and we talked a little bit about what's her name and looked at her face. And on the first day when my son started, he had a face that he recognised, he knew those names already, and I think that helped a bit. And we did a few sort of practice runs of walking to the nursery and passing the nursery and saying, this is where we're going to walk every morning and this is where we're going to stop off, and that's where your teacher's going to be. So I think a little bit of preparation, you don't want to overdo it of course and scare them, but just sort of a little bit, mentioning some names, showing some faces can help a lot of children. I think understanding the settling in procedures of the nursery and being on board with them is really important. I've had experience both as a teacher, a nursery teacher, and as a parent. And when I was teaching, I used to, I knew for a fact that the moment the parents went and said goodbye, the children, 9 times out of 10 would practically immediately stop crying, get on and be fine. And as a parent, of course, that's incredibly hard to do when you see your child crying, to be able to say a happy goodbye and leave. But I think from experience that really is the best way. So sort of understanding if that is your nursery's way of settling in, to be on board with that and respect that as much as you can, because it really does help. So I think all these are sort of helpful tips, though it is always quite a challenging time, but often very short, only a few days or a few weeks, and then your child's away. I think that nurseries can be useful in getting into certain very competitive pre-preps if they have a sort of official or unofficial link to that nursery. Some won't be sort of widely spoken of, but you'll hear that maybe a huge percentage of children will go on to a certain school afterwards. Others will be, owned by the same company and therefore give you a bit of a leg up. However, that is not always the case by a long stretch. I think it's more the exception rather than the rule. Generally, just a really great nursery will stand by itself, because if they're preparing a child really well for the 4+ assessments, or preparing a child well just in line with the EYFS, that will be enough to secure them a place in the next school. They won't necessarily have to have attended one particular nursery. I think the most important things to remember about choosing a nursery is that you need to trust your gut, you need to feel comfortable with the nursery environment, you need to like the headmistress, you need to feel like these are people you can communicate comfortably with, because with all the ups and downs of starting a child at nursery, it's really important that you feel supported and you feel comfortable in that environment. So trusting your gut is really important, and I think trying where possible to find a really good nursery that is local, that you're not travelling too far for. I don't think there is any nursery that's so much better than its peers that it's worth travelling miles and miles for. There are always good options locally, so try and prioritise those.